it was like a blueprint landed on my doorstep, and the inspiration just started flowing in a way that I couldn't have imagined this on my own. I really felt like I was being helped to create something that people would need in this form.
You are now listening to the Going North podcast, where you'll receive tips and techniques to advance yourself. I'm your host, Dom Brightman, and every week we're going to be hearing from an author who's going to share their expertise to help you charge forward in life. On a quick side note, be sure to check out Going North the book. It's available in ebook, audio, as well as paperback form for those who love to read a traditional book. Now let's get on with the show.
And today on the Going North podcast, we have, you guessed it, another author, but not just any author. We got a special guest on this episode of the Going North podcast, baby, because this wonderful gentleman right here is a best-selling author with his first book that is really, really out there, and it's really going to blow your mind, because this wonderful guy right here is a channel and intuitive consultant, and it is really awesome that this guy is not just your average life coach. This guy adds a different dimension to the coaching world. And you're probably wondering who this wonderful author I got today. It is the one, the only SMW, Saryon Michael White. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, sir. Excited to be here.
Oh, yeah, glad to have you here, man. Glad to have you here, man. My man's been releasing content like crazy, babies, going off with his first book and just reaching out for the masses, and it's really amazing. So, mind telling us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you currently are?
Yeah, thanks. It's been a long road, actually. It's kind of interesting looking back, because I've actually had this idea about being a writer really since before I could write. I mean, going back to early childhood, somehow I knew that I wanted to be a writer. And a little ways down the road, as I got older, I knew that I wanted to write books that would change people's lives, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know what that would look like. And this idea just kept developing in my consciousness until I was about 18, and then I had the first kind of moment of clarity where it's like I saw a book that was already published in the future, and it was out there, and it was having this beautiful ripple effect on the world, and that was the confirmation of this seed that had been in my consciousness my entire life up until that point. But it was still another probably 10 years before I really started to get the actual inspiration for the things that I was going to be writing about. So it's taken a lot of patience, and there are many times when I thought that maybe I was off track because I wasn't publishing books yet all through my 20s, and I was struggling with financial issues. And, when the inspiration finally came, I actually thought then that, wow, in a couple of years here, I'm going to be out there as a published author, and it was still another 10 years almost of writing, exploring, wrote a couple books that I haven't even published yet, and then finally the blueprint for this fiction series came through, and I knew that this was going to be the first series of books that I would publish. So it's been a really interesting ride just getting here, which took a lot of patience, a lot of perseverance, a lot of trust and faith in the creative journey. But I learned a lot along the way about how to empower people to take those steps on their own creative journey, which is why I really love what you do on this show and what you're all about, giving people those tips that can help them overcome the hurdles, both outer and inner.
Oh, yeah, man. Yes, sir, indeed. Well, congratulations on publishing the first of many, and it sounds like you got a war chest ready. 2 more books in the wings, huh?
I have a war chest ready, yeah. I'm really cultivating 2 different series, a fiction and a nonfiction. The fiction series is coming out first, even though the nonfiction series, the greater part of it was already written before I started the fiction series. And it's interesting because when I look at both of these series and what they are designed to do, the nonfiction series really contains a lot of spiritual insight and spiritual teaching, and I would go so far as to say as divine revelation, that is presented really as like a journal that unfolds in a way that you see these lessons and insights and teachings and revelations coming in and then being lived experientially as a living journal. And then the fiction series is designed to take some of those insights and put them in a whole different context of an entertaining fiction story, so that eventually when the entire body of work comes out, I think some people will gravitate towards the fiction books first, and then they're going to want to go deeper and read the nonfiction. And some people might read the nonfiction and come over to the fiction because they want more once they've read the nonfiction. So I didn't really come up with this on my own to do it this way. It's just been kind of a revealed blueprint that step by step, I didn't know when I was writing one book that it was going to lead to something else in an entirely different format. But sometimes the creative journey is very nonlinear. You don't really realize where you're going to end up. Like fiction, for example, I always loved science fiction when I was in my teens, and I thought, that'd be really cool to write a science fiction series one day. But I never really had any idea what I would write about. And so when this series, beginning with the first book, Roya Sands and the Bridge Between Worlds, came in, it was like a blueprint landed on my doorstep, and the inspiration just started flowing in a way that I couldn't have imagined this on my own. I really felt like I was being helped to create something that people would need in this form. And it's really exciting to see something like this come into being, especially because I've loved books like The Da Vinci Code and The Celestine Prophecy and The Mutant Message Down Under and, Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach. Those kinds of books that use a truth-telling through fiction approach have always been my favorites. And so I think that people that have loved those kinds of books are going to love this new series.
Awesome indeed. Remember The Da Vinci Code? That book was huge a few years back. Well, actually, maybe even longer than that, but it was like huge.
Yeah. It actually influenced my writing a little bit because it's fascinating to dive in and look at how another author tells a story. And interestingly, there is a place, it's an actual physical location that was used as part of the backdrop for the story of this book, and it's a library in upstate New York in a little town called Watertown. And when I stumbled onto this library, they have an actual 3D tour that you can take where you can click on a room and it zooms over to that room, and you can do a complete 360 view. You can look up at the ceiling, you can look down at the floor using your cursor. And I was able to just move through the whole library, and this library has all of these interesting features. It has quotes on the walls, it has statues, it has other things that through the lens of the story become a bit of a mystery, because it turns out that the various quotes and symbols and images on the walls ended up being perfect for creating a kind of a Da Vinci Code-like part of the story where the main character is decoding things and finding hidden messages that advance the plot. So it's a lot of fun to incorporate something like that in a book like this.
And it's really awesome because it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier about just writing one book and then eventually just venturing off into another book in the fiction terms where it might be easier for some folks to actually drink in what you're trying to share with them.
Yeah. I know some of the most powerful teachings for me came through fiction books. I mean, the Celestine Prophecy being probably the best example, because I read that when I was 18 years old, and to me it spoke to an awareness that was wanting to awaken in me at the time, and so it was perfect, synchronistic, divine timing that book came into my hands right when I was ready to burst into this other level of awareness. It was really a life changer and a game changer for me at the time. And so I really felt, it's funny, when I read that book, I always had this idea, or at least for many years, that I'm going to write books that are going to change people's lives, and I was trying to conceive of what that would be, what it would look like, what it would do. And when I read the Celestine Prophecy, my first thought when I finished the book was, darn, somebody beat me to it. That was the book I was going to write. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now, because I don't know how I would, top that. I mean, at the time, it gave me so many things that I needed in a way that was, for me, speaking to what was possible for my own work. And I just had no idea that I was going to live this spiritual journey for 20 years leading up to publishing this first book that would contain so many insights that I think are equally profound but more relevant to the world that we are living in now. Because 20 years ago, when those books were on the New York Times bestsellers list, there were challenges and issues and historical potentials that we weren't yet fully facing or even aware of back then, that now we can write about, we can talk about, we can generate a conversation about. So I feel really honored to get to be an author living in these times that is inspired and that can reach people with something that can empower them and give them real tools of discernment to understand the choices that we're making in our lives.
Yeah, you're right about that indeed. In addition to reading those other books, what really just gave you the confidence to finally actually publish your book?
I wrote actually probably half of this book all at once, and it was, coming through in maybe about a 4 to 6 month period. And at the time, I had a lot of free time, and I was able to focus on it, and it felt like this beautiful inner journey of dreaming about the characters and just living inside of this fictional world. But various forces entered my life that really interrupted that process, and I had to set it aside for many years. And it took great effort to come back to it, because by the time I was getting determined to really complete this project, because part of me just couldn't let it go, but my life was much busier. I had so many demands on my time, and what happened was I got determined. I got really determined that I will not let the next year of my life go by without finishing this book and at least having it ready to self-publish. So I made a commitment to myself, and I made it a priority. And what I found is that when I did that, one of the wishes that I had came true. My wish was that I had a dream team of people that were supporting me, that helped to create this beautiful creative container for the work. And when I made that commitment, within a couple weeks, the editor for the book showed up. She actually came to me and offered her services. And at first I thought, this, I talked about that I was writing a book on a radio show, and, this might be, she heard about it, and this might be the first of like 10 different people that show up wanting to be an editor for my work. But she was the only one, and I checked her out, and we did some stuff back and forth. And at a certain point, it dawned on me that, this woman was heaven sent. That I literally cried when I realized that the divine had sent me the perfect editor for this book. And that was, I would say, a big part of it. Feeling like this was now, I had a support system for finishing this first project. And then I found an artist that I liked. I found the typesetter that I liked. I found all of these different things that helped me to get the first version of the book ready. And that year just flowed in a bigger way than I imagined was possible. So the confidence really came partly from the support system I had. But, after the editor came, I was the one that was also reaching out and finding other supporters, because that confidence boost made me feel like, okay, I need to take charge. I need to build this team around me of supporters, of people that are going to hold me accountable to this project, and that's what I did. So it was, just a process at that point of just steamrolling past any doubts or fears that came up along the way and just staying focused in that determination.
Accountability is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. It really does help, and I would recommend that to anyone who's trying to finish a creative project, to have an accountability partner, whether it's a coach or a best friend or, somebody you're collaborating with, and, have somebody that you're checking in with to, state what your goals are and your commitments are, and to have somebody help you to stay focused on them and to notice what you're doing that may be sabotaging that, so that you can get past it.
Yeah, amen to that, because it's so true. Because it's one thing where you're just by yourself and you're going to try to release something, but if someone else knows and they got a bear trap memory, then you are not going to escape.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I had several different accountability partners, but the editor, in my mind, became my accountability partner because, number one, I'm paying for and contracting and putting on the schedule her services, and so I need to have certain pieces ready to go by certain dates, and it needs to be polished enough that it's ready for an editing process, and I need to be prepared to make use of the time that I'm paying for because, putting my own money into this, and my money is not unlimited. So that really helped me a lot to be accountable to myself, was that I was, now actually hiring help, and so I needed to stay on track so that I could make the most of, what I was putting into it as an investment.
That's also true indeed, especially when you're putting up your own money and investing in yourself like that.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious about, your process as well, because, what I notice is that when you really get committed to finishing a creative project and putting it out into the world, sometimes that's when the inner resistance and the doubts and the fears and the inner hurdles actually come up stronger. The point at which you get committed, that's when you have to face the hidden resistance that's kind of been in the backdrop. I discovered that through experience. I'm wondering if you had an experience with that as well.
Oh, yeah, you were right about that. It actually kind of reminds me of Stephen Pressfield's books. I think there's one called Do the Work, and then his more popular work, The War of Art, talks about the whole resistance thing, and it's really true. I mean, even after the accountability lists, because I had a similar path where I would tell folks, like, hey, I'm going to be writing and publishing this book, and then they'd be like, okay. And yep, and after I created that list of people and realized that, hey, I got these folks to count on me, it's like, hey, I got to get this work out. And I gave myself a year deadline to actually get my book out. and I was coming close to that year, so I basically put out what I had at the time, and it was really good that I did do that because it gave me the experience to realize how long it takes for certain book covers to be done, and it depends on which editor you use and all that other good stuff, and just learned a lot of lessons and realized, like, hey, this is really good. I mean, looking back, I know I'm going to republish my first book down the road, but it's been one heck of an experience. Like, the accountability has been the main thing. That's really what keeps you going and helps you fight off that resistance. I mean, there's going to be days when you just want to procrastinate and just be like, yep, just go to YouTube on the internet or the PlayStation or just go swimming on social media, never to return.
Yeah.
But yeah, the accountability is the main thing that really keeps you going with that.
Yep. I actually found that when I was really getting down to it in the year that I committed to finishing the book before the year was out, that the biggest challenge that I had was that the creative process was starting to feel too much like work. And I needed it to be more like play, because the play is where the creativity comes in. Now, with the nonfiction books, that's a different story, but, this is much more coming from pure creativity with this series. And I found that when I was not giving myself enough space to breathe in the workflow and the creative process, then I ran into resistance. I ran into a part of me that was protesting, and I didn't know where the resistance was coming from at first, but I could feel that some part of me was resisting working on the book. And so I had to go within and I had to find out, what is this part of me that wants to procrastinate, that feels tired, that's, protesting this. And it was just a part of me that wanted to play and be creative and felt trapped in the way that I felt trapped at times as a child with oppressive amounts of homework and, feeling criticized for not doing it or not wanting to do it. And so I had to figure out how to make it fun for the kid inside of me and to figure out what the kid inside of me wanted to give myself breaks, to give myself room to play so that it could be fun and the creative process could be inspiring all the way through, even in the editing process when it might feel like work at times. So I think it's important that we can't ignore that part of us that needs to be addressed on an emotional level and to feel nurtured and feel heard and feel like there's room to play, and it's not all work, and it doesn't have to be hard. It can be fun.
Yeah, that I can imagine that just being difficult, especially with a fiction book, because that's really more imagination involved. In a non-fiction book, you can just list some points and be done with it. With a fiction book, you still got to keep a story going.
Yeah. And I also think that, when you're channeling an inspiration for something, regardless of what type of book it is, then that inspiration is connected to an audience. And probably one of the most powerful insights that I've worked with for many, many years now, especially, the last 10 years, is this idea that the future is creating the past, or that the future is having a causal effect on the past, or, in this case, on our ongoing present. And so I like to imagine that the audience is always there with me around each creative project, and that the audience is co-creating this, that we're co-imagining this, and that there is an energy of gratitude and inspiration and appreciation that and creativity that is flowing, almost like flowing back in time from the future to help inform and inspire what you are creating in the moment. So I really love this idea of connecting the inspiration and the flow of inspiration with your audience in simultaneous time, because it's a lot harder when you're writing something from the framework of, I don't even know if anybody's going to read this or anybody's going to like this. If you're feeling inspired about it, that inspiration is there because there's an audience for it. That's kind of the assumption that I like to work with. And so I think it's easier to connect with the inspiration that way.
True indeed, true indeed. So any advice for those who are looking to also try to find a way to keep the fun in the creative process, whether it doesn't even have to be writing, because I know you're also a coach too, so it could be just keeping the fun aspect in that too.
Well, I think that it's important to pay attention to what you need on every level of yourself. And this is something that really is true not just for a creative project or being in the creative flow. It really works wonders in relationships and relationship dynamics and anything that you want to do in life. You just don't want to leave any part of yourself behind. And it's so easy to do that. It's very easy for the adult inside of us to sometimes, and maybe even very often, think of the needs or the emotions of the inner child or the creative aspect of us as a hindrance to our to-do list and the things that we need to get done and all of our responsibilities. So it's very easy to leave behind that more creative, emotional part of yourself when you feel overwhelmed with our responsibilities in life. And so I think that it's important to be able to give space to that purely creative, purely emotional part of us so that we can get in sync with ourselves and we can get every level of us working together as a single unified whole. And it's all about sacred listening. It's about just really listening to what do we need on each level? What do we need physically? What do we need emotionally? What do we need mentally? How are we sourcing ourselves on all of these levels so that we're taking care of ourselves? Because when we are nurturing all of these different levels and not leaving any part of ourselves behind, then we are able to be in our creative flow. We're able to feel the support for the creative work and the creative energy. Whereas, at least in my case, I spent many years of my life feeling so much of a responsibility and a burden of responsibilities that took me out of that place of creativity. And I just did not know how to make room for it. And I didn't even realize what I was doing to myself to deny space for the creative level of my being until I started realizing that I was following patterns that were familiar to me from my upbringing. And I was basically learning to and practicing this way of valuing my outer work and valuing these accomplishments of physical work and proving my worth through physical work. The way like my dad was a mechanic and he built things and he did things physically, and if I wasn't doing that type of work, then I wasn't proving my worth. And so there wasn't really space. There wasn't an energy of recognition that he held for the creative potential inside of me. He couldn't see it. And he actually had that same kind of creative potential inside himself, but he did not know how to support it within himself and to even really fully access it. And so I had to unlearn that way of being. I had to unlearn that value system and learn that I could actually flourish and make money and be happy with valuing and recognizing the value of and supporting and following the flow of my creative energy. That there was just as much a flow of resources and expansion, both creatively and financially, coming from that level of myself. And I had to be the one to recognize it, because it was a form of recognition that I just didn't receive when I was growing up. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to create more balance. But when you didn't grow up with a valuing or a recognition of your creative potential, and who does really? Most of us have enormous amounts of potential that remain invisible during our upbringing. Even if you have the absolute best parents in the world, still there are so many things that we bring in as innate, inborn talents, even if they're dormant, that are invisible. And so you have to be able to recognize the reflection of that in other examples beyond your family. You have to be able to recognize it in yourself and take steps to courageously pursue it. I'm sure you would agree with that, because you've definitely courageously pursued your potential, even from a really early age. And you have to be able to recognize it in yourself.
You're right about that, indeed, and it's really amazing what you said about the unlearning a specific value system that was really embedded in you when you're a child from your dad, because it's like, when your dad's a handyman working with his hands and a mechanic, and you may want to have some creative pursuits, it could be difficult if he's not used to that, or actually difficult for anyone if any of your loved ones aren't used to any creative pursuits. They're used to just working with their hands or doing something else, and it's just really, you just have to learn to unlearn certain things.
Right. Yeah, and, my dad was a good person. My parents were good people, are good people, but we still all can have potential inside of us and gifts and abilities that are just not visible because our parents don't have eyes to see all of it. Most of them don't. I would think that it would be extremely rare to even have one parent that can see the enormous amount of potential and the diversity of potentials inside of any child. So it's a discovery process. And I also think that this is another really powerful insight. And I'm so glad that we get to talk about this kind of thing on the show. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. But I tend to think now that our value as human beings, the value of our emotional energy, our intelligence, and especially our creativity, is so incredibly immense that the only way to access it and live it is to break free from the value systems that we were raised with that just don't contain that same level of value. In other words, our value is so immense beyond what our culture even has understood about the value of being human and who and what we are as human beings, that we have all been stifled to one degree or another by previous generations that could not see that immense value, didn't know how to recognize it in themselves or others for that matter, and just couldn't see it to the degree that we are now awakening to begin to see that in ourselves and others. But now we're starting to get it. We're starting to glimpse just how incredible a human being is and how powerful their creative impact is on the world and how immense their influence can be. So, I mean, we're all invaluable. You just cannot measure the value of a human being. But there's a lot of limitation in our thinking about our value that we're all having to burst out of and rewrite the software in order to actually live that value to the degree that we can.
Agreed with that, especially nowadays where technology allows humans to connect a lot faster and a lot easier than ever before, and it kind of actually allows folks to actually see the value that humans can actually provide to other humans in the world. So I agree with that fully, because it's, I guess in a way it kind of goes with technology getting faster and quicker. It just allows humans to shine a lot better, because, I mean, sure, one school of thought may be thinking like, hey, the machines might kick the humans out of jobs, but at the same time, it's like, it's not always going to be like that. The technology really is allowing fellow humans just to connect with one another, and it's amazing, because, I mean, I believe you're based out in California or Canada, right?
I'm currently in Utah, but I'm moving to California.
Oh, okay, beautiful, beautiful indeed. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, connect with someone thousands of miles away on the other side of the country. So, yeah, man, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, I talk with people all over the world, and it's amazing how there is not just a technological platform that allows it to happen, but there's a resonance. There's a resonance of spiritual equality that I find. I could be talking to somebody in India that's been raised with a completely different culture, but we are able to relate to each other as spiritual beings in a really deep and profound way that connects us together in a way that it really transcends the technology. And you can feel it. You can feel that even without that technology there's a connection that bridges across time and space, because there's an underlying unity and an underlying spaceless, timeless interconnectivity that exists as a part of the human resonance field collectively. I was just looking for a quote in the book, because I wanted to share this. It kind of encapsulates what I was saying before in one sentence. And it says, embracing more of your potential involves continually learning to value yourself more than you did before. That's kind of speaking to that process of constantly stepping out of a more limiting or lower estimation of your worth.
That's true. Got to continuously learn. Got to continuously learn, baby.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of learning, if you were to wake up tomorrow and you were 25 once again in the current year of 2018, but you get to keep all of your knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
Well, I would say that the creative path is very nonlinear, and that it's important not to be attached to the timing, and that you will have all the time that you need. It may take longer than you think it's going to take, but you will have all the time that you need. And so it's okay to just accept wherever you are at in the journey, and to not think that you've done anything wrong just because the big dream hasn't manifested yet, because it will. You just have to keep taking things one step at a time.
That's right, one step at a time with both shoes on. That's what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Well, for those who want to keep in contact with you and keep up with all that you're doing, how do we keep in touch with you?
Well, I would love for people to check out the website for the book, which is royasands.com. That's ROYASANDS.com. And there they can learn all about the book, the series. You can order a copy of it. It's really such a powerful, wisdom-filled, insight-filled teaching for the modern age in the form of a mysterious, intriguing adventure story that I think it's going to be a more profound read than most people are even expecting. And then people can also connect with me at saryon.com, saryon.com, which is where I can be contacted and booked for private sessions where I do readings for people, combination of intuitive coaching and also connecting people with divine guidance, with their own spiritual guides. And of course, I love helping people to overcome obstacles within themselves and clear whatever is preventing forward movement in the process of evolving and manifesting our dreams.
Woohoo! Beautiful, beautiful indeed. So there you have it, folks. Go ahead and head on to Saryon's website, learn more about him if you enjoyed this interview, and more importantly, head over to that Amazon.com, type in Roya Sands, and this should be the first book that pops up. It is that beautiful purple and gold cover book right there. Pick it up and read it and add it to your personal collection. And it's on ebook too, so if you don't feel like carrying a book around still, you can carry it in your phone, your tablet, or your electronic device.
Yes, indeed.
Any parting words for the folks still listening?
I would say stay determined and allow your determination to manifest your dreams to be fed by an already existing future where it's all happened and there's a bright, shining, guiding light from your future self, your higher self, however you think of it, and let yourself feel that the success path is not something that you're creating out of nothing. It's something that you are remembering and surrendering to, because your success is already assured. All you have to do is just keep taking one step at a time, trusting in yourself and having the courage to rise to the occasion of each opportunity and inspiration that calls to you and speaks to you.
Hey there, buddy. Looks like you made it to the end of this episode. Since you made it to the end of this episode, do both of us a favor and stop being greedy. Stop it right now and share this episode with your friends and your fellow podcast lovers, especially those who have book clubs and want to listen to the authors who write some amazing books. Be sure to check out the rest of the backlog too while you're at it and share all those too.